Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our very first session of Made for Marketers, coming to you live from Sydney and broadcasting over to Perth as well, where Sarah is joining us. Made for Marketers, for those of you who haven't tuned into any other episodes, is a show where we speak with marketing experts to share their smarts on strategy and execution to really help power the customer journey. And today I'm really excited to welcome to the show Sarah Mitchell from Typeset, who of course has launched the State of Writing 2020, the first kind of piece that deep dives into the state of writing and business writing effectiveness. And we're really excited to have Sarah with us today. Hi, Sarah, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Janine. I'm really delighted to be here.
Oh, we're so happy you could make it. I know that you've done the rounds a little bit with this, and there's been so much excitement and interest in your report. So we're really excited to kind of have you share some of the key findings with us, and then use that really as a springboard to kind of dive deep into, well, what marketers can do and what this means for marketers in terms of improving their writing effectiveness and efficiency, and hopefully, take some of those learnings into next time.
Yeah, well, I can definitely fill you in on some of those things.
Great. And so tell us, do you want to just, for those who haven't had a chance to download the report, of course, we'll share that link after the session, but for those who haven't had a chance, do you want to give us a bit of a top line on your State of Writing 2020 and some of the key highlights?
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'd like people to know is the reason I wanted to do this research, or we wanted to do the research at Typeset, was, businesses invest a lot of money in writing, but I don't think that they always get a return on that investment. And when you talk to writers, or when you talk to people in business or marketers, there's a lot of confusion about what makes good writing and what makes bad writing. And you can have that academic conversation, or you can have the creative conversation. But for those of us that are creating content, or are investing in content, it really has to go back to some kind of a business benefit. And I firmly believe that great content is an asset, but we don't always know what great content looks like, because you can have a really ugly little PDF fact sheet that gets loads of downloads and drives traffic to your business. And we've all seen these really slick looking, highly designed pieces of content that nobody ever reads and finds. So what I wanted to get to the bottom of was, what makes content successful? What makes it successful for the business, and what doesn't? And what can we learn from the people that are having success compared to those that might be struggling? So that's really what we wanted to find out, was not what is good writing or bad writing, but what is effective. The problem with effectiveness is, what's effective for me, Janine, is not going to be effective for you, because we have different business goals.
That's true, but I'm sure you'll also agree that there is some sort of standard around a general baseline level of effectiveness. And it sounds like your report did identify some of those in terms of some of the key factors that potentially drive effectiveness, and some of the practices and processes, particularly that help to, ensure that a piece of writing is more successful than not. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing we did is, we asked people, are you finding success with your writing? And do you know what successful writing looks like? Because we weren't even sure that marketers might understand. Now, as a writer, I understand if I feel like that I've delivered a good piece of writing, would the person that's commissioned that piece of writing feel the same way? So we asked, do you know what successful writing looks like? And, we got 76% said, yep, we know what it looks like. So great. But interestingly, only 45% said that they are achieving the success that they wanted with that writing. Yeah. So then, then that opens the door for, okay, so how do we get to that second part? And, one of the things we found, you won't be surprised about this, is quality control makes a big difference.
I can imagine. And so why don't you talk us through that in terms of that, I mean, there's a couple of things in my mind that go to quality, and we'll talk about a couple of those issues in as we go through this session. But there's always this sort of dichotomy between quality and quantity. So before we sort of tackle that a little bit, do you want to talk a little bit to, well, what does quality actually mean, and how can we put together some benchmarks or some processes or systems to ensure that we're actually improving our quality scores as we're developing content?
Yeah, and what it came down to is really how much editorial rigor is involved in the writing process.
Mm.
So the people that did more kinds of editing were far more likely to say that they were experiencing success. And when I say editorial rigor, it is things like having a managing editor or somebody who oversees all your content.
Mm.
Um, Using tools like editorial tools like brand style guides and editorial calendars, going through a proofreading exercise, which was interesting. You would think that people would automatically proofread, but they don't
Yeah.
necessarily do that. And if they do, most of the people that said they proofread were proofreading it themselves.
Yes.
So they weren't using any kind of an accredited proofreader, but the people that did, they were far more likely to be successful in getting the success that they needed.
Yeah.
And then interestingly too, it wasn't the other thing that was really effective were people that were having regular editorial meetings.
Right.
So it was interesting to think that there are people that are developing content and a lot of content in some cases, but then they're not meeting with somebody that's got oversight over that whole thing, or they're just not planning it out. So all of those things that go into kind of the front end before you ever put pen to paper or a finger to a keyboard make a difference.
Yep, yep. And I should have said this at the very beginning. For anyone out there that does have questions, please do submit your questions as you go, because we will get to all of those at the end. So apologies for breaking the chain there, but do submit questions as you go, because we will get to those. But Sarah, a couple of things that you just pointed out there that I wanted to touch on. One was obviously, the planning is so critical, and I think we can't emphasize that enough in terms of content and the quality outputs that come out of content when you do the planning up front. But another element that you talked about there, for me, goes to consistency, and having somebody oversee the content, program production, having some style guidelines, some editorial guidelines, brand voice, things like that in place, all go to ensuring that actually you're delivering consistent content. And we know that consistency is a great thing in terms of helping the audience, learn and understand and set expectations on what can come next, and help us also kind of meet those kind of quality control measures. And it also sounds like a lot of, and I know you touch on this in the report as well, the importance of content strategy. I mean, that planning element, identifying what you need to talk to and who your audience is and what's important to them, are all parts of a strong content strategy, of course. But can you touch on that a little bit as well, and that the importance and the value, if you like, of a content strategy in the mix?
Well, and I think I've long been a proponent of starting with a strategy, because the thing I like about the strategy is it should identify the audience. And one of the things and I'll talk about this in a minute, but we found that there were some problems with people, understanding the audience. It also outlines the business goals.
Right.
And then once you've got those business goals, you can attach the marketing and objectives to it. And that, once you know who your audience is and you've got the goals that you're working towards, then you can plan all the rest of your, your publishing. And when I say publishing, I'm not just talking about writing, but any kind of content that you're going to produce. And you're
Absolutely.
going to be in a position then when you can go back to your business and say, these were the goals and these are the people that we were trying to impact somehow, and here's how we measured against that. But I think a lot of times as marketers, we just get focused into the doing of it without the thinking of it. So that piece was so important, and that with that strategy, then all these other assets to the business or to marketing kind of fall out of that. So that's where the editorial calendar is, the genesis of the editorial calendar. And that's having things like the brand style guide that
Yes.
helps, and having, all of that, all of those tools that help your proofreaders and your editors and your managing editors. And quite frankly, Janine, I know, and we all know in a lot of organizations that could just be one person that does all of those things. But we definitely, the report definitely showed us that if you can get more than one pair of eyes over anything that you publish before you publish it, it's going to be improved in quality, and then the effectiveness improves as well.
Absolutely. And I think I mean, intuitively, we all know that even when we're sometimes drafting an email or putting together a business proposal or something, we kind of want the validation or, a second pair of eyes on what we've written, just to kind of check in that it reads as intended, or it's kind of the message is landing in the right way. And so I think because writing is so, I guess, inherent in all of business. We're not just talking about marketing communications
Right.
here. We're actually talking about business writing. So whether you're a salesperson, whether you're a senior executive, whether you're a marketer, taking on writing tasks across the business, that adherence to quality over quantity, the kind of imperative of speaking in a consistent, brand voice, having kind of consistent sort of style guides, etc., that govern your writing projects is really critical, because I think the outcome of that is that the audience, whoever they are, and whatever touch points that they engage with your brand on, feel like they're receiving the same message, that it's one brand that they're engaging with, not several people within a brand.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the really, disturbing things that we learned is we asked people that took the survey, how they were looking at content for the next 12 months.
Mm.
And 57% of them said that they were going to publish at least as much or more than they'd published in the previous 12 months. Which is great, especially if you've got all of these, your processes and workflows set up properly. But what was concerning is that only 30% of them were going to increase budget.
Yeah.
So now we're looking at, we've got a low rate of effectiveness. We're going to do more than ever. And that figure about doing more than ever didn't surprise me, because that, the Content Marketing Institute tells us that every year. But less funding. Now, and why that's really a big problem is the people that were that were only moderately effective, that were struggling, their number one struggle was knowing what their audience wanted to read. And that was a really high percentage. It was like 69% of those who say that they're struggling with the quality and with the effectiveness also don't know what they want to read. So when you think about it, we've just got this situation where we're going to do more, we're going to be less well-funded, and we're just putting stuff out there without any really clear idea. And that, again, these things all link together. That goes back to the strategy. That's in the strategy, we should have figured that out.
Absolutely. And that's it. And it is a domino effect when you think about it. They're so kind of intertwined, all these elements. But that struck me when I read your report, that figure around audience need and understanding what audience need, because I guess, in the work we do, that's the first thing that we try to uncover, because it defines every other thing that we need to think about. Message, channel, content format, etc. Everything is defined by who the audience is and what they need and how they engage. So I'm kind of that was kind of quite telling, I think, for me. And I want to kind of spend a little bit of time thinking about, well, how do we get under the surface of that, and how do we help marketers better understand who their audience is and what they need, outside of engaging a partner or an agency or a consultant to kind of help them with that process? What are some of the things that marketers can do for themselves to make that job a little easier?
Yeah, well, that, and it does start with the strategy. One of the things, and I've been talking about this a lot with people, how, first of all, defining who that audience is. And I think one of a struggle that marketers often have is we go out to this with best intentions. And as soon as we start to make proposals about content we're going to create, or we start to put in content for review, everything wants to go back to the brand. And we have to remember that what we're creating is not for us and it's not for our management. And we often have to do a piece of education to even sometimes the executive team to say, look, I know you don't like this, but it's not for you.
That's
You know,
right.
it might be for an engineer, it might be for a doctor, it might be for an accountant, it might be for somebody that just needs to get their plumbing fixed.
Yeah.
So it's not about I think too often we focus on brand and we need to focus on that audience.
Yeah.
I think surveying your current customers is a really good way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally like picking up the phone and contacting them in person.
Yeah.
There's a book that I use that has some really good guidelines on how to do that. It's called Buyer Persona from Adele Ravella.
Yeah.
She's a fantastic speaker. I saw her at Content Marketing World in the US a couple of years ago, and she's got a whole chapter on how to call your customers and extract that information from them about what they need. And she's got really good examples of questions to ask and how to guide the conversation.
Yeah.
And I find that to be super effective.
Fantastic.
And then, of course, social media gives us all kinds of answers. There's all kinds of tools like
Yeah.
Mention and social media monitoring.
Yeah.
But I think the more that we can actually talk to our customers, the better off we are to understand them.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as marketers there are lots of expensive tools that we can use to actually help uncover the audience and primary research and all these sorts of things, but there's so much at our disposal and within our own business. Speaking to the people that are at the coalface, customer service teams, sales teams, etc., picking up the phone as you suggested, doing a bit of that social listening and actually deep diving into not just what people are saying but the intent, and their tone of voice and what's kind of fueling those key conversations. All of that stuff is really so rich and insightful in terms of what can inform good content and messaging and positioning. So they're really great tips. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. But something that you mentioned there, I think leads us nicely into the next point, another sort of favorite topic of mine, which is the approval process. And we talked about, often what marketers struggle with, or other people in business, is managing expectations up the line, managing stakeholders, and particularly executives who aren't as connected to the intention of the content as maybe marketers are, and wanting that content to kind of feel for them, etc. That, in our experience, often where approval processes are long and complex and convoluted, the net effect of that is that it can often dilute the quality of the content. So I want to kind of open that Pandora's box and let you dive straight in and give us your perspective on that.
Oh boy, I think we've all been in that situation where you feel like you've written a masterpiece and then it goes to committee, and by the time you get it back, the worst one I ever did, it was a 3-page case study, and when it came back from all the approvals, it was down to 3 paragraphs, and it was just pushing brand, and it was just soul destroying. I think one of the again, it goes back to strategy. It's getting those metrics laid out that you're going to measure. So what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What is the goal? How are we going to measure that? And how are we going to report it? And those are the things you can keep going back to, even if you've got a managing director or somebody on the board saying, well, we want more of this. And you say, well, let's take a step back and think about what we're trying to accomplish. And this is what we have to do. So often, it's a matter of saying, it doesn't really matter. Our audience doesn't really care about our brand. They really care about, and they don't want to hear about how great we are, but they want to hear about how our products and services can help them. And that isn't always, you're not always successful, but I think if we just keep taking everything back to the goals of the business and the goals and the objectives and how we're measuring them, then that helps a lot with that iteration process. And also, I do think I've had the opportunity a couple times to say, can we just do a proof of concept? Can we do it, my way once? Or
Yeah.
can we do two pieces side by side and run them as sort of an A/B testing and see which one is more effective?
Yeah.
So we're good at A/B testing and things like, headlines
Yeah.
or subject lines, but have we ever sat down and said to our management, well, let's do one your way and do one my way, or
Yeah.
do two versions of the same thing and see what happens? And
Yeah.
that's, I don't think there's an easy answer, Janine, for somebody that stubbornly believes that even without any marketing background, they know how to market better than marketers. Um, and so sometimes the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, but I love that idea about extending the A/B test, and I think marketers have it tough, right? There's pressure points all over the business,
Mm.
the expectation to constantly do more and deliver more, but sometimes getting beaten at every hurdles at every point of the journey. So it is challenging, but I think kind of to the point we made at the very beginning, you're right, strategy is key and consistency is key. And as marketers, I think we have to take that responsibility to, champion for the customer, but also educate constantly, that enduring education within the business around what's the intent of this content, how are we setting context around it, help our initial audience, who might be those internal stakeholders, better understand what we're trying to actually achieve, and understand their point of view and their perspective, and try and find that balance there, but without compromising quality and without compromising the impact that this content is going to have for the audience. Because as you say, at the end of the day, what your report and research shows is that the outcome is ineffective content, and that's not good for anybody.
Yeah, and I think, once it starts to not be effective, it's hard for us to get more funding. So we already know that, we're all under pressure for budget right now.
Mm.
There's always, it doesn't matter what happens in any business, marketing is the first one to take the hit on budget, because it people feel like it's sometimes a bit of a fluff, or it's not a necessity.
Mm.
But once we can get once we're measuring and reporting and showing a line between the writing and business goals being met, then it's not hard to get funding,
That's right.
and they're less likely to cut back on that. But you really have to get, I always think you have to get some of those executive stakeholders involved in the strategy process in
Yeah.
the beginning, and at least listen to them and hear what they want to accomplish. And
Yeah,
then they become invested in it.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think it's critical that key stakeholders are involved in that strategy and have a piece in it. I don't think a strategy can succeed otherwise, to be honest with you. It's just it's a recipe for kind of
Yeah.
disaster, I think. And so that is super critical, and the role that marketers need to take in terms of that stakeholder engagement piece is really important. So we've kind of talked about a couple of key areas there. I want to go back to something that we touched on a little bit earlier, and that's the balance between quality and quantity. And it's an ongoing battle. You're right. I mean, the Content Marketing Institute year on year has shown that people are doing more and more and more content. And as recipients of content, we can sort of see that. But certainly, what we can also see is the quality has not improved, and often what we're seeing is quite poor content being delivered at us. So how do you think about that, and how can we help marketers, I guess, strike that balance between needing to do more, or maybe challenging the idea of needing to do more? That's probably the point of view that I would take, and really kind of using that that energy and the resource and the time to invest instead in quality.
Well, yeah, and there's a couple parts to that. So the 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 biggest struggles after knowing what my audience wants to read are publishing consistently
Mm.
and maintaining quality
Mm.
over time. So to me, that speaks to this issue then that you just mentioned between quantity versus quality. We know that people that spend more time in all the different kind of quality functions, so that's like not just proofreading for grammar and spelling, that's really easy, but are we going through fact checking? Are we going through logic and flow? Are we looking at a piece as it relates to other pieces in maybe a larger content puzzle? That's going to be more effective. Those tend to be more effective. People that do more of those kinds of editing in all ways tend to be more successful. That those kinds of activities take time.
Yeah.
And I think investing, and there's lots of other research that Andy Crestodina's blogging report for one, and the Content Marketing Institute, we're seeing a trend that the less is more is working. So what I would like to see, and from my own experience, I know that it's better to take time and go through all of those processes. And if that means investing in a proofreader, or investing or outsourcing some of your writing, because outsourcing is another way to improve effectiveness,
Absolutely.
then you're going to get a better result. And I think I think the internet is, and the marketing world in general, there's plenty of content in there, but as Robert Rose from the Content Marketing Institute says, we should all be focused on doing as little as we can to get the effect that we want.
Yeah.
And to me, I used to publish twice a week, every week on my blog. Now I'm not, sometimes we only get once a month.
Yeah.
But I'd rather invest the time, all of that time, and spend 10 hours on writing a blog post, and then another couple hours in the quality checks afterward, and put that out. And for me, that's working really well. And I'm sure from, if I draw the dots from the research, that's what's working for other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Just spotted the time, and I notice we're almost up, and I absolutely want to leave some time for questions. But thanks for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge with us, Sarah. But I'm hoping I think there are some questions that we've got. Jane has been moderating those in the background. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box now, and we will absolutely get to those. Jane, are there any questions?
Yeah, we have a few questions. The first one for Sarah. So you talked a lot about measurement of effective writing, but what are some specific ways to measure the writing, and how do you monitor it?
Yes, that is a great question. So one of the things we found is that most of the common ways that people are measuring are all activity metrics. So website impression, clicks, all of those kinds of things that we easily get reports from all of our tools. But what the business wants is they want to know things about how it's impacting almost always the bottom line. So if it's customer acquisition, or if it's lowering, increasing the value of a single customer, or increasing loyalty and things like that. So when you talk about effectiveness, I think that's what you have to look at, is what is the impact to the business this content is having. And again, it's really hard to take, a blog post, or maybe a white paper, a case study, and say this one piece moved the needle. But if you can look at, the benefit over time and see how it works. So that's what I would recommend, is that, you're looking for things like, I guess if you want a really immediate, is are you able to increase your subscriber databases? So are you getting more people that are giving you permission to market to them? Is your content being shared? Yes, that's great. That's an activity metric. Are you actually getting backlinks that's helping to improve your SEO? So the content's good enough that other people are linking to it and endorsing you that way. So those are some more immediate ways, but it really does go back to, are we somehow improving the bottom line of our business through either customer retention, customer loyalty, leads generated, lower cost of acquisition, all of whatever those things are. Those are the things that we need to be reporting on.
Yeah, great. And I think you're right. Sometimes it's very easy to look at the vanity metrics, but if we can correlate some of those to other midterm or longer term metrics as well, then we're able to tell a better story to the executive. And sometimes I ask people, what are the leading in, so sometimes vanity metrics in and of themselves don't tell you much, but they're really good indicators of future success to come. And so how do we tie those things together and help to tell a more compelling story?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, we often get caught into this lure of big stats, so one of them is page impressions. Well, it's a little bit disingenuous for us. We can buy page impressions, and if we put advertising money against a piece of content and then say, look how great it did, well, that doesn't really speak to the effectiveness of the writing. That speaks to the effectiveness of the person running the AdWords campaign. And I think we have to be careful with that.
Yeah, fair point. Jane, is there any other questions?
Yeah, we probably have time for one or two more. So the next one is, so you talked a lot about methods and tools for effective writing, but for those working on a small budget, what are some important first steps to get started?
Well, I'm working on a small budget, so I totally understand that. And to be honest, I don't know that many people that have big marketing budgets, especially right now. I mean, obviously the huge brands, but I think most marketers, especially in Australia, are working with less money than they'd like to. Get another person involved in the process. And if that means handing it to somebody so that they can read over it, if that's the only thing you do, that's going to help improve a lot. If you can outsource your, outsource your proofreading, outsource any of your writing, we know that that's going to help a lot too. But putting in that editorial rigor so that there is more than one person that's making decisions about it, that is the best thing. And even if you're a one-man band, you can still find those people either in the organization or people outside that can do it for, it's far more cost effective than hiring somebody.
Absolutely. Great. Anything else, Jane? Yep. So this will be the last one. You both talked about how it always just goes back to the audience and knowing what the audience wants to read, but what are some specific ways to define this, to figure this out? To figure out what the audience wants. Yeah, what their audience wants to read.
So one of the things that sorry, Janine.
No, go on.
Yeah, one of the things that I do is I really do try to find somebody in that audience. So if and I find too, when I'm writing, if instead of writing to this vast, cohort of people that there might be 30,000 people who are in my target audience, I just try to find one person, especially if I know them, and everything that I write specifically to that person. And I find when I can, and I'm not talking about a persona, I'm talking about somebody I might actually know or somebody that I've actually had a conversation with. And that really brings it to life for me. So if I can, instead of speaking to, Harry, who's a millennial, if I can talk to, Lachlan Smith, because I know that guy, he lives around the corner from me, or he's the son of my, girlfriend, that helps me a lot. And I think then I get a richer source of information that I'm putting in through the writing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I know we've run out of time and a couple of people need to jump off, likely to another Zoom call. So thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and your thoughts. And it was really fabulous to kind of read the results from your State of Writing 2020. Now, I know that your State of Writing 2021, survey is opening soon. Is that right? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the survey for the 2021 is opening next week. We have if you want to register your interest or in taking that survey, I've got a bit.ly link. It's Content Convo, CONVO, or I'll be putting the link out next week, and I think it's Thursday that it opens up. So what I'd really like to do, we would like to get more Australian people taking the survey. It is a global survey, and maybe even get the chance to do an Australian report that's specifically just for us.
Oh, that'd be great. And we'll certainly share that link. So we will be obviously packaging the recording up and sharing it with everybody on this call, and we'll include a link to the survey, so everyone can have their say for the next survey.
That'd be great. Thanks, Janine.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Great to chat to you again, and look forward to seeing the next one. And for everyone else out there, if you enjoyed this, please look out for more episodes. We've got a next one coming up in about 3 weeks' time, and we'll drop some information about that to you all on email as well. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.